We're like right on time. We have another like 30 seconds
Oh,
or a minute.
well, yeah, once we I'm going to move those once they start speaking.
Okay.
So like, how fast are these going to be moving? And is there a chance that like easy things will get through? Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I don't know if there's like something to have some bipartisan that you could get through.
If we get that, then that's something that would help on.
It's already
But you know, frankly, the strategy.
It's crazy, right? Because I think was it MERS that put out like there's the fewest unanimous votes in 150 years, and I was like, well, I remember one day I was on the floor and there was like Yeah, start pulling out heads.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out on this beautiful, brisk winter morning. I'm State Representative Julie Brixey, and I'm the sponsor of the Justice for Survivors package. My community, which includes Michigan State University, was devastated when we learned about the unconscionable sexual abuse that happened at MSU a few years ago. I learned firsthand that childhood survivors don't report what happened to them for decades, years, and often never at all. In fact, the average age that a childhood survivor of sexual assault comes forward to disclose that abuse is 52 years old. But our current statute of limitations expires at age 28. And that statute of limitations was just changed in 2018. That's one of the lowest in the country. As a result of our narrow statute of limitation, by the time a childhood survivor is ready to share what happened to them, they'd likely to have missed their opportunity to pursue justice by several decades. Serial sexual predators like Gerald Sutter know that they can get away with their crimes by preying on vulnerable and running out the clock on the statute of limitations. Gerald Sutter has finally been sentenced, but many survivors of his abuse have long been living in prison, left behind to deal with their trauma by a judicial system that locked them out. In response to the crimes committed by Larry Nassar in 2018, the Michigan Senate voted unanimously to extend the statute of limitations and open up a revival window for those who never got the opportunity to pursue a claim to seek justice. However, those bills were later modified and written so narrowly that only survivors of abuse by Dr. Larry Nassar had the chance to reopen their claims that had already been expired. Which is why, 2 years after the legislature passed those bills, survivors of Dr. Robert Anderson, another Big Ten University sports doctor, were unable to open their own claims. We are the only state in the nation that created a revival window that restricts access to justice based on the occupation of the abuser. Survivors of sexual abuse shouldn't have to hire a lobbyist and get laws passed just for the opportunity to have their day in court. That's why I've been championing the Justice for Survivors package throughout my entire time in the legislature. Our bills would align the statute of limitation with the actual age that survivors of childhood sexual abuse come forward and open a 2-year revival window so that everyone who missed their opportunity in the past has an opportunity to come forward and seek justice. Each year that the legislature fails to act on these bills, we not only fail to hold predators accountable for their abuse, but we incentivize predators and institutions housing them to cover up their crimes until the statute of limitations has passed. Next, we're going to hear from survivors themselves. And I would ask for your respect as they share these stories and understand the courage that it takes to come forward. First up is Corey Renz.
Morning. So, I was introduced to Jerry Sutter. I was about 8 years old, roughly 8 years old. And I just want to kind of hit something that you had said up there too, as far as the people coming forward at like 52 years old and whatnot. I would agree with that, but the system, like myself and Sean here, as well as I can't tell you how many others, we did come forward at a younger age, but it was swept under the rug. We didn't have a voice. I was best friends with Jerry's stepson at the time, and being young, you're very impressionable. You don't know what you do know what right and wrong is, but at what extent, you know. The only thing a child has is their innocence. You know, I don't know how many people in here have kids? What would you do if your child came to you and said, you know, hey, I've been molested, I've been touched? And we're not talking just a pat in the back, you know, we're talking full-fledged molestation. Started when I was about 8 years old, 7 in that time. And I played football. I had a love for the game, you know. I played baseball. I played every sport you could possibly think of. But there's 4 things I will always remember growing up. It's shut up, sit down, and if you're ever in trouble, go to somebody in a uniform. Man. So, and don't talk to strangers. That was the 4 things that I will always remember. When you're in trouble and you're told you can trust these people, whether it be a fireman, a police officer, a referee, you know, they're in uniform, you know. What a lie that was. Because that all happened to me, my son had a love for wrestling, a love, and we would travel the United States, all over the country, living out his dream to want to wrestle. Several people, hey, we'll take him with us. No. Trust. The trust issues I have, don't get me wrong, it was an awesome experience to be with my son to travel. But you can imagine the amount of money that was spent on that, which, whatever, it's just money. The trust, and not just with other people. I've been married for 22 years to the same woman, and intimacy is rough. It's rough. I got this tough guy persona that I feel I have to put on because I was abused, and you are looked at, or you think or perceive that you're being looked at differently from people. Like, oh my God, that's that guy, you know? And that's mainly the reason a lot of people don't come forward until they're older. They don't care. They don't care. At that point, they don't care what nobody thinks about them. You know, I came forward at a young age, and I was told I was crazy. And reliving this over and over, like today, just, you know, not as tough as I thought. You know, it's affected me in a way where I would act out. I did 9.5 years in prison. Got out and was determined to be a better person. And I can say that I've definitely done that. Some of the people that I know that were also molested by him don't have the opportunity to sit up here and give their voice. It's because they're dead. You know, there's another individual that was supposed to show up here today. After talking with him, I asked him, I was like, you gonna come here, man? He's like, I can't do it, Corey. I said, I can't do it. And I get it. But 28 years old, or 28 years over the age, for the statute of limitations on this. I guess I just don't understand it. If anybody in this room had a child that was harmed, you would go to the ends of the earth to protect your child by any means necessary. But when you don't have the support of laws, what are you doing it for, other than your own self-gratification? Laws are backwards in this state. They're backwards. You know, you get they go to prison. I mean, you get sentenced to 10 years in prison. 10. Not just in this state. I've traveled with sports. I traveled with his son, you know, and the accomplices. We almost felt like we were guinea pigs. You know, child predators are real, man. They're real, and they're slick. They know the laws. They know how to get around the laws. Master manipulators. I know I could go on and on and on for days, man, but at some point in time, we're all got to eat dinner at some point. But yeah, the laws in this state are backwards. They're so backwards. We don't have a voice. Takes this long for somebody to come forward, going for them to tell them, sorry, nothing we can do. And yeah, I mean, I don't even know how much sense I'm making right now. My brain is just all over the place right now with thoughts and just everything. To relive it, every time I look at my kids, man, every time, I fear that I'm out in public, and it don't even have to be one of my kids. It could be anybody's kid. I can spot them a million miles away. Their tactics, a million miles away. To control myself and my anger, because the second I pick up the phone and I try to call the police and say, I suspect this guy is doing something, what proof do you have? But yeah, I don't know what else to say. I mean, I'm like torn with emotion every time I come up start talking about this. So I don't know if I pass this over to Sean or...
Thank you so much, Corey, for sharing some of your story with us. Next, we're going to hear from Sean Sutherland.
Hopefully you can hear me. My name is Sean Sutherland. For some context, I'm 41 years old. I'm a victim of Gerald Sutter. I actually met him 25 years ago. So if you do the math, I was 16 years old. I worked at a concession stand at Aim High in the Capitol Center, which no longer exists, but Aim High was a 5-court basketball tournament area. I mean, they had a gym, all sorts of stuff, but I worked at the concession stand and was introduced to Jerry at that time because he was reffing tournaments, and these were tournaments from all sorts of organizations, from Gus Macker to travel ball teams. And when Corey mentioned the just tactics, I mean, I was identified, groomed, manipulated, isolated, and then sexually exploited. And at my own fear of judgment, and at the time in my life, I had been essentially abandoned as a 16-year-old. So I was living out of my car in friends' houses, and I didn't have any parental figures or guidance at that time. And much like Corey said, there are people that you can trust and you assume that you can trust. And he took an interest in me and, in his words, wanted to help me out. no one was really helped there. They were abused, exploited, and as Corey said, passed around. I mean, the trust that you put into someone that wants to help you and then takes advantage of you, and then to try to come to grips with what that means for how do you say that to someone? How do you tell someone about that? And the stigma associated with the male-to-male crimes in that time, 25 years ago, we didn't have the type of awareness that we do today, the type of understanding of things like, child sex trafficking, and it's become more common knowledge today and more accepted that we need to stick up for those survivors and those victims. And so I just buried it. I buried that in self-induced ways of coping, drugs, alcohol, and I battled that stuff for a ton of years. And, I think one of the terms today that seem to be the hot one is gaslighting. Gaslight this, gaslight that, you're gaslighting me. Let me tell you about gaslighting. And the way someone can make you feel as they could discard you, and that you need them, and that you actually believe that because you are an impressionable, easily manipulated person, because you don't know any better, and you trust someone. They're an authority figure. And just on that atmosphere of, where I met him, I was at a concession stand. He had access to me. He had access to so many athletes. I saw so many different relationships of people that he knew. Didn't particularly know what he was doing because he was very good at developing relationships with other people, as well as those that housed that type of behavior. He built trust with them, so they would look the other way. He was just a strange guy. He was just kind of weird, just that kind of stuff. That's all you would hear that was just the best warning someone could give you about Jared. And that happened for 2 years. And then when I was essentially too old, and I'll share a short story just to give you some context to this situation. Jerry was so capable of manipulating someone where you felt as if you needed him. And he would, I guess I'm not sharing a story, but more of who he was, of just who he is, because he operated this way for 50 years. And the fact that there were people before me and after, it's sick. And once I said something about it, I think this is not okay. I don't want anything to do with this. It was just like that it was over. Just like that. Move on. Just like that. And I couldn't feel comfortable telling anybody. So I buried that. And like I said, abuse, terrible behavior, things that I made it to feel, he made it to feel as if what was happening to me was because of me. My fault. I was responsible. I was culpable. I was a victim. And so I refused to be a victim. And it was so difficult. And so I never shared with anyone. I can say this, that I shared with one person who I thought I trusted, shared with one person in that time. And that very first person, because of the world we were living in 20-ish years ago, said, "You should never tell anybody about that again. That is disgusting. That is horrible." And so what do you do with that? You put it right back in the box, and it comes out in things like anger, self-worth, understanding to live in guilt and shame, to relive, as Corey said. It's insane that you can relive something like that each and every day, from stupid things that you would see that would put you right back in that scenario. And to try to walk through life like that and be put together is ridiculous. It's the most duplicity you could ever live, the most duality of a life. It's obnoxious. And shame and guilt to be heaped on you by yourself, self-induced, you start to believe that everyone around you must know about it, or if they did, how they would treat you. I had a uniquely distorted relationship with trust after that, because it was scarred. It was changed. Everyone was out to get me. Someone had some reason why they were going to manipulate me, to take advantage of me. And that's just not a way to live. And today, someone could share that, and now it's a little more acceptable. A little more. But it's not close. And so silence didn't do me any favors. It's a profound and convoluted thing that predatory trauma can put on someone. It's so messed up. That's the best word I could come up, best words. Just messed up. And it's a whole nother thing to then have a news article sent to you by somebody you used to work with that this person has been arrested. I always knew this guy was strange, was the message I got with that article. And then I had to confront reality. Here we go. I think I need to say something, not for my own benefit at this point, because I knew that if they were going to charge this person, I needed to say something, because I likely had details and facts and understanding of just exactly the type of person he was, what he was able to do. And I struggled to pick up the phone to call that tip line, struggled. Because to share something again, I was so afraid of what was going to happen, how it was going to be received. And you can make up the most insane stories in your head about how people will treat you once you share that. And at great personal risk, I'm standing here today in front of a whole bunch of people. Then how am I going to be received? Is there enough grace in this world socially to understand that this stuff happens? And there is likely somebody in your life that has still not shared this because there's such a stigma associated. And then to share my story and have a prosecutor tell me, I appreciate what you've shared, but unfortunately, what happened to you happened too long ago. And the ins and outs of our laws didn't allow that. No case. Sorry. But we really appreciate your testimony. What type of archaic system are we a part of, where we live in a world that touts about social justice, what they can do to help others, how the weak should be given a voice? I would agree. I'll get to that, I promise. How people need to be heard, and people need to be held accountable, and they can't be, because time is now on the side of the predator. And then understanding that the laws are such a wall now that I have to plead and beg with someone to do something about it. I just think it's irresponsible. It's a fractured legal system. There's an absence of justice. There is a legitimate truancy of duty by politicians that are looking the other way. And it blows my mind that there's someone, and blew my mind, how many wouldn't be of support of this bill, wouldn't be in support of the legislation. I'm standing up here, at great personal risk of my own life in hopes that we can destroy a stigma, give people a freedom and opportunity to share their story and not feel like they're going to be received with judgment. Because I truly would have just kept it to myself. And ultimately, I feel it would have destroyed me, because it just is the most intense weight ever. And because of some trusting people that I could confide in, I've felt some freedom and empowerment from this. Going to his sentencing and sharing a victim's impact statement, which was my only allowance provided to seek some personal justice. To not be in support of this and the change in the statute of limitations is impossible for me to understand. How anyone cannot look at the humanity of the situation and say, yes, I'm into that. We need to do something. Because there are so many crimes that are being committed and people that are not being held accountable, folks in positions of influence and power that have the opportunity to look the other way. For what reason? I don't understand who might be being protected, why it's so important to look the other way, and I guess it's just creating shelter for predators like this. And the fact that 10 years for somebody that operated likely, not just in Lansing, had access to statewide athletes, likely in other states, because of the stretch and the sports and the things that he was attached to, the facilities, the organizations that he worked for. And I just hope that there is someone that can hear this and say, I can do that, because they'll be received well. And that's why people are so quiet and can't feel as if they want to come forward, because how will they be received, and what recourse and reparation do they truly have in this state? And how ridiculous that is. And much like Corey, I could go on forever. because my passion is not for my own personal justice with this. I truly have to, you need to understand that. I just feel as if there is a person that has even 1% of the feelings that I've had to endure over this time, then I want to do something to help them. That's it. That's it. I guess that's really all I have to say, other than all these cameras and folks. I appreciate you being here, but don't let this just fall into another small article or a 3-minute blip. Do something with this and be open and curious to the opportunity that there are so many people like myself that have lived with this for decades and how that has influenced their life. We need a better story in this state. We need a better outcome to this garbage. That's it.
Corey and Sean are two of the first to be able to come forward and talk about what happened with Mr. Sutter. But as they talked about, we suspect there are many, many, many more survivors out there, and not just in Michigan, but potentially beyond. At sentencing alone, there were about 14 people who came forward to be present there alone, just here in Lansing. So with that, what I want to let everybody know is we can open the floor now for questions that you have for any of the three, and then their legal counsel from Greywall Law is here as well for legal questions. And once we're done with that, we'll open up, and we are open to do one-on-one interviews here before everybody goes. So I'll open it up right now if anyone has a question.
Sure.
Thing right there.
I agree.
Go ahead.
Sean, if you had the opportunity, if the prosecutor hadn't told you it was been too long, if the law was different, what would you have done in addition to the victim statement, kind of when you had come forward at that point?
I guess to understand your question, if the statute of limitations was not the cap on my my crime, I would have felt the need to put whatever weight of the legal system on Jerry Sutter, as well as understanding the wrongdoing of other organizations that he looked or worked for, and that they likely looked the other way. I truly, that was my thought going to sit down with that prosecutor. Is I think it's finally time to start to share my story, and I hope there's some kind of outcome where I can feel some closure. And I was immediately met, well, not immediately, after about 2 hours, met with there's no possibility of that. And that's crushing after sharing such a sensitive, raw story. So thanks for the question.
How did you handle that in the day or so afterwards? How did you?
Well, I can tell you how I would have handled it in my previous life if you want. Like I said, I battled with drugs and alcohol for a long time. I found Jesus, so I can tell you I prayed a lot. Try not to be so angry. Try not to be disappointed. My wife is one of the most incredible human beings I've ever met, and she has received this story very well. She was really the second person that I'd ever told in my life. So I knew I could run to her with this and say, this really sucks. But I guess one of the things that just kind of is that I realized through that there was just not going to be any lid put on this thing. And then started to dig into it and heard about the possibility of this legislation and what was going on. I said something needs to happen, and that my energy be put in that. And I'm not a lawyer. I read the analysis of that legislation and went, I don't know if this is even going to help me, but my goodness, I hope it helps someone. And so that's where that energy came from, is that for someone to feel the way I felt after that meeting with the prosecutor of being like, sorry, buddy. She was actually pretty nicely receiving me in it, but it's kind of what the end result was.
Yeah, the law is the law.
Yep, sorry. So.
Representative Brixey, if you're able to say, why has this package sort of stalled out? As far as I can remember, it has not been brought to the House floor for a vote. It's a waiting one. We're on break. What reason, if any, have you been given for its lack of movement?
So I'd like to back up a little and talk about the first two sessions that I introduced it. And in those two sessions, we were under Republican control, first with Speaker Lee Chatfield and then Speaker Jason Wentworth. And the bill had originally passed the supermajority Republican-controlled Senate. And Margaret O'Brien, Senator Margaret O'Brien, now Clerk Margaret O'Brien, had introduced it. And then it had stalled out in the House in 2018 and got gutted. So when I introduced it, it didn't get a hearing. I had Republican co-sponsors. It got, one of the bills got a hearing, but then never got any action. And later there were allegations made against former Speaker Lee Chatfield that would pertain to these types of actions and crimes that he was being accused of. So, it makes you wonder if that was part of the reason that the bills didn't get any action earlier. This session, we have been incredibly busy and have had a really packed agenda. We did get the bills through a hearing. We had a bunch of amendments that we made to the bills. We got them passed out of the committee, and they did get onto the House floor. Unfortunately, they didn't get there until the last 2 weeks of the legislative year. And we were literally on the House floor until, I think, 1:30 in the morning one night, midnight, 2 o'clock in the morning another night, and we just simply didn't quite make it. They didn't quite make it across the finish line. According to the spokesperson for the Speaker, we were a few votes shy of what we needed on our side. And the Republicans took a position that they would not support it, that there would be no Republican votes for this legislation. So I'm not sure on their side if they're still trying to protect the former speaker or if it's just political gamesmanship, but I am very optimistic that we will get over the finish line when we return. There were people that were not comfortable with it, and I honestly don't know the problem, and I don't know the people. So the way that we work, we have a whip who is in control of counting noses, and I don't know the exact nature of the problem, but I am super optimistic that when we get back, that we'll get the kinks work out of it. We did make changes, a number of changes to the bill package to get people on board, to get it as far as we got it. It's a great package. It takes a lot of factors into account, and it offers substantial opportunity for people whose statute of limitations expired in the past to be able to come forward and have their day in court. And that's a really, really important part of the legislation. And one of the things that the two gentlemen here didn't talk about, but is really important about passing laws like this, are that when we pass these laws and when we allow these revival windows to open up and people to come forward with old cases, what happens is that there are institutions that, you know, we heard the terms, people look the other way. Sometimes it's a lot more active than looking the other way. There are institutions that were repeatedly informed about abuses from members of their institution, and they did nothing. And they failed to act, and more people were harmed as a result of that. And we see that over and over and over again with these serial sexual predators, especially when they're preying on children and very young adults. And so if we want to see real change, we have to have our institutions be held accountable for their roles in these serial sexual predators being allowed to get away with what they've done. And once we hold those institutions accountable, that's when we'll see the real changes be put into place to protect children. You know, it's my hope that we won't need a statute of limitations this long someday, but we certainly aren't there yet. And ultimately, the goal is to prevent these crimes from happening rather than to just allow people to be punished for, perpetrating the crimes. We want to stop them from happening, and that's why it's so important for the institutions to be held accountable, so that those real institutional changes will occur. Thank you so much.